What's up, everybody? And welcome back to Let's Talk Black History with your host, Miss Tay Nicole. The series where we uncover powerful stories from Black history that deserve to be told, remembered, and honored. Today, we're talking about something many history books barely ever mention: the Stono Rebellion of 1739. Have you ever heard of it? No? Well, stick along and find out some more. If you have heard of it, let's see how much of it I give you and how much you're expecting. This was one of the largest slave uprisings in colonial American history, and it happened decades before the United States ever became a country. But the Stono Rebellion tells us something important that often gets left out of the conversation about slavery. Because, yes, they love to keep conversation of slavery. Enslaved people didn't just accept their situation, as we're so oftenly told. Many of them resisted, fought back, and risked their lives for freedom. I know, you're used to hearing how they took beatings. Well, let's talk about it. So, the conditions of slavery. Let's start there. In the early 1700s, South Carolina had one of the largest enslaved populations in the American colonies. See, plantation owners relied heavily, and I do mean heavily, on enslaved Africans to work rice fields, indigo fields, and not just the cotton fields, as you always like to throw out there. The conditions were brutal. Enslaved people were forced to work long hours under violent control, and I do mean violent. Families were separated, freedom was stripped away, and punishment for resistance could be deadly. That's one thing they kept correcting those textbooks. But even under these harsh conditions, the desire for freedom never disappeared. And in 1739, that desire turned into action. So, I mentioned a rebellion, right? Let's talk about the beginning of it. The rebellion started on September 9th of 1739 near the Stono River in South Carolina. Yes, in South Carolina. An enslaved man named Jemmy, spelled Jemmy, is believed to have been the leader of this uprising. Early that morning, Jemmy and a group of enslaved Africans broke into a store near the Stono River. Now, they seized weapons, ammunition, whatever they can get their hands on. Once they were armed, they began marching south towards Spanish Florida. At the time, Florida was controlled by Spain, and the Spanish had promised freedom to enslaved people who escaped from the British colonies and also converted to Catholicism. I think is the right way to say that. So the goal of the rebellion was clear. It was freedom. So of course that's the beginning. Now, the March for Freedom. Let's jump into that. As Jemmy and the group marched, they carried a banner that reportedly said "Liberty." Along the way, they stopped at plantations. They killed, and I mean killed, several slave owners and freed enslaved people who chose to join them. Because yes, as you guessed it, some people were afraid to join them. Their numbers quickly grew. Some historians estimate that the group reached anywhere between 60 to 100 people. For enslaved people living under brutal conditions, this was an act of incredible courage. But it was also extremely dangerous because once the rebellion began, the colonial authorities, as you expected, quickly moved to stop it. Because you can't have that. Not back in 1739. So, what happens when they confront confrontation? Later that same day, the rebellion or rebellious group encountered a group of white militant members. A violent battle broke out. The militant had more weapons and more manpower, as you expected. Many of the rebels were killed in the fight, others were captured. The rebellion was eventually crushed, but not before it had shaken the entire colony of South Carolina. By the end of the conflict, around 20 to 30 white colonists were killed, and a dozen, maybe a few dozens, of enslaved Africans lost their lives. It was a battle that got me in this chair. So, of course, what's the aftermath, right? So, the Stono Rebellion terrified slave owners across the colonies. If enslaved people could organize an uprising like this, it meant the system of slavery was not as stable as they believed it to be. So the colonial government responded by tightening their control. Of course they would. In 1740, South Carolina passed the Negro Act. This law made slavery even more restrictive. It became illegal, and hear me again, it became illegal for enslaved people to, as you guessed it, learn to read, gather in groups, earn their own money, or move freely without permission from their slave owners. See, the slave owners were trying to prevent another rebellion from happening. But the rebellion had already made its mark. They were too late. So I know you ask yourself, well, why the Stono Rebellion? Why does it even matter? It seems like it caused more chaos. Well, the Stono Rebellion is important because it reminds us that enslaved people, enslaved Africans, enslaved Black people, were never passive victims as they tried to paint us out to be. They resisted, they organized, and sometimes they fought back. From revolts to escapes to everyday acts of defiance, resistance was always a part of the story of slavery. No matter how much they try to paint the picture that we just did what we was told to, yes, master, that wasn't the case. The Stono Rebellion also showed how powerful the desire for freedom became. The desire for freedom could be, even when the risks were deadly. Stories like the Stono Rebellion are important because they challenge the simplified version of history many of us were taught. They remind us that Black history is filled with courage, resistance, power, and strength. If you learned anything, and I do mean anything, if you learned something new today, make sure you do me a favor, and that's like, subscribe, and share this video so more people can learn these stories too. And let me know in the comments, what Black history topic should we talk about next? This has been another Let's Talk Black History with me, your host, Miss Tay Nicole. And I'll see you in the next episode. And as always, stay peaceful, stay blessed, and let's stay black, baby. Peace out.